This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media Interview, recorded live on blogtalkradio.com on January 18th, 2008. No matter what role he's in, Bob Balaban always makes an impression. From Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind to playing the president of NBC on Seinfeld. And the same is now true of his work as a director, which you'll discover when Bernard and Doris, starring Susan Sarandon and Ray Fiennes, debuts on HBO on February 9th. Bob, welcome to Mr. Media.
Well, hi, Bob. It's nice to be here. I'm not sure where I am, but it's great.
We're somewhere in the ether, as I understand.
Okay.
Hey, I appreciate your time this morning. I know it's kind of an early call.
No, I get up very early.
Oh. Well, why don't we start? Tell us a little bit about Bernard and Doris. This is the story of Doris Duke, the tobacco heiress, and her butler, but maybe you can define it a little more than that.
Well, Doris Duke, as some people may remember, was known most of her life as the richest little girl in the world. Her dad had hundreds of millions of dollars. She inherited a lot when it was a lot to have $100 million. And by the time she died in 1993, she had managed to amass $1.3 billion, which in those days was a lot of money. Now it's pocket change, you know. When Doris was sort of famous for not ever finding a guy who would ever love her for herself. When you have that much money, it's not all, and you're a lady, it's not always the easiest thing. I suppose if you're a man, it's not all that easy anyway, because everybody wanted something from her. Later in her life, in 1987, a butler, an Irish butler named Bernard Lafferty, came to work for Doris Duke. He had worked for Elizabeth Taylor and Peggy Lee, and was thrilled to come and work for this sort of famous, exotic creature, Doris Duke, who was known for being rather eccentric and generous in many ways, certainly with her foundation, and the two of them bonded, and when Doris Duke died in 1993, she left this young, alcoholic, itinerant Irish butler guy, fairly uneducated, basically in charge of her $1.3 billion fortune. So we made a movie starring the brilliant Susan Sarandon and Ray Fiennes, in which we imagined what might have transpired behind closed doors during the 6 years that Bernard came to work for Doris Duke, that would enable this very unlikely fellow to get to that trusted point in Doris's heart where she would entrust him with so much of her beloved fortune. So we have made a story of how this relationship came to be. It's a kind of a quirky love story between two unlikely people.
And now I'm very interested to know how you were sold on a biographical film in which, right up front, as we watch it, we're told some of the following is based on fact. I just love that.
Well, thank you. First of all, the legal department of HBO was thrilled that I wanted to put that in the front of the movie. It helped so many things. But truthfully, they're two real people, and we do attempt to, we did attempt to more or less, in a broad sense, place these two characters in a real context. Doris Duke did have a house in New Jersey. Bernard did come to work for her. In a general sense, many of the things biographically that we say about the two of them are true, based on my non-extensive knowledge of the two of them, which is mostly headlines in newspapers and public record. But this is an internal journey of an emotional relationship between two people. So we wanted to be very clear that as we made that journey, this was something we posited. This was something we invented. I mean, something did happen between the two of them, but we made it up as to what really happened.
As I watched, I kept thinking of this line, and I think it's from an Elvis Costello song. Some of my lies are true.
You know what? I love that you thought of that, and it might be, and that may very well be true in this case.
Now, how do you, with something like this, I'm thinking that Doris Duke would be considered a public figure, and so she would be in play. But what about Lafferty? I mean, he was hired by a public figure. He never asked to be a public figure, and of course, he's passed away now.
Well, yes, and I think you'd also. Well, he has no relatives, and basically, you're talking about legal issues possibly with somebody who was a real character?
A little bit, yeah.
Basically, there's nothing that we say about him that you wouldn't have learned from going to the library and looking up a lot of newspaper headlines. And there's also nothing libelous or scandalous about what we're, the way we present it.
Well, I have to say, I mean, it's a very entertaining film.
Well, I like that. You didn't have to say that. Thank you for saying that.
Well, I just got to call it like I see it. It's funny. It's the kind of thing where if my wife had described it to me on Saturday and said, okay, I want to go out and see this movie tonight, I would say, isn't there like a Jackie Chan comedy or something? But I watched it and I was very entertained, and I think one of the things that really struck me about it, I mean, your lead actors, of course, Susan Sarandon, Ray Fiennes. This is not the guy from Schindler's List. This is not even the guy. This is certainly not the guy from the Harry Potter movies.
One of the things I love so much about Rafe in this movie is he's utterly unexpected, does nothing in it that you've ever seen him do before, and manages to make the most complex character who's sort of simultaneously very, very creepy and sort of adorable and vulnerable and strange. I agree with you. I haven't seen him do anything like this. I haven't seen anybody really do anything like this.
It was very interesting to see him eyes down for so much of at least for that first half of the movie. He's kind of eyes down. He's in that butler servant type of mode. And I just keep thinking, okay, when is he going to burst? When is something, and appropriately, he did not. I mean, that's the whole thing. That's what makes it such an amazing performance, I think.
Well, his character kind of blossoms. This is a very, the journey that these two people make is basically a journey to opening up to each other, which did, in our movie takes a couple of years for this to happen. Fortunately, the movie is only 106 minutes long, so you won't have to watch it for several years. But the journey that they make is not an Indiana Jones journey where they travel by, bus, truck, and camel to get to an exotic location. The exotic location to which both characters are journeying is each other's hearts. And it's a twisted path, and it's a difficult one, but it had to be very measured on both of the actors' parts. For Susan as well, I mean, she barely pays attention to this fellow for about the first 12 or 14 minutes of the movie, so that when she finally looks at him, you realize that she's had hundreds of servants in her long and exotic and rich life, but there is something about this guy that is causing her to pay attention in a way that she hasn't done before. And that's the beginning of her journey. And in Rafe's case, you pointed out very accurately, he can barely look at the woman. When he starts being able to say a direct sentence to her and look her in the face, you can sense something flowing back and forth between the two of them because they're great actors and they're very good at telling an emotional story.
Mm. You've described the film, and I think I read that Susan described the film as a love story, which is certainly what I thought, while I was watching it. But I mean, it's not in any way a love story where these two fall in love and they live happily ever after. I mean, it's not so much a romantic love, more of a devotional one.
Yes, I would say if we were playing at your local multiplex, it would say a different kind of love story. The love that dare not speak its name.
I don't know if we go that far.
Mm-hmm. Well, we would if we wanted to get more people into the audience.
I was going to say, yeah, maybe sell some tickets. Now, at what point in the process did you sign on? And I think I read it was before Susan and Rafe came on.
Well, I sort of, in my life as I shuttle about between being an actor, a director, a writer, and a trash collector, my friend Eileen Maisel, who is an executive at New Line Cinema, a brilliant producer person in her own right, sent me the script. She knew the person who wrote it, I believe, had come across it, and just sent it. She lives in London, and she said, I don't know, I think you might find this thing interesting, which I did. The script has gone through many incarnations since that point. We chose to make the movie on the East Coast, so the movie can't begin the way it used to begin, which is Bernard Lafferty arrived in a tour of the stars bus, as they were saying, and on the left lives Doris Duke, the billionaire heiress and we got to explain Doris's background through the loudspeaker of the tour bus. We couldn't do that because we made the movie as if it were in her estate in New Jersey, and numbers of things happened to it, but I was from the beginning struck by the compelling nature of this needy woman who could never find anybody to love her, and this butler who himself felt unworthy and unlovable, and yet their stations in life were so different. Sexually, they were so different, and yet something happened between the two of them to drive them together. And I thought, even if she had never been a real character, this would have been a very interesting story. I gave the movie to Susan Sarandon. She loved the idea of playing this kind of character. We discussed literally making sure that the movie we would eventually make was much more an internal journey and much more about an emotional ride between these two characters, and therefore focusing much more on the two of them on their path to, as you and I are talking about it, falling in a kind of love. And then decided that Ralph Fiennes would be the only person we'd like to make the movie with, and Ralph felt the same way about us, and I went around and found $500,000, and very bravely these two very number A tier actors decided to make this very brave decision to come and be in a movie with nothing to support it except two wonderful performances. We had no money, we barely had a location, we couldn't find shoes, and yet we had a very wonderful working experience making this thing. Maybe that's why, it was so pared down, it was so essential about the two of them and their two characters.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the budget on the film. And first of all, I think I want to point out, and correct me if I'm wrong, while this is going to debut on HBO on February 9th, I'll add that again, it was not commissioned by HBO. It was acquired by HBO after it had been made, right?
HBO does that occasionally. Yeah, we made an independent movie with Kevin Spacey's company, Trigger Street Independent, that had raised I don't know, $2 or $3 million to make a certain amount of $500,000 movies. They decided to make one of them. And we were on our way to the Toronto Film Festival to look for a buyer, at which point Colin Callender from HBO saw the movie, loved it, said, wait a minute, I'd love to take you off the market. And we paused and we went, well, gee, we could get bought up by, Spinning Films Independent if we go to Toronto. And I really sat down at that point and discussed this with Susan and Rafe and all of our people and said, I think this is an opportunity to have two fantastic performances seen by a number of million of people, as opposed to, in a little theater on the Upper East Side with 65 people a day seeing it for about 3 weeks. And we could also pay back the wonderful people who would come and helped us make this movie for no money. I thought, that's kind of a winning combination. Let's do it. And we did, and HBO bought it, and here we are.
And I think we need to talk more about that budget. It was $500,000, I think you said.
Yeah.
But
it ended up, if we were being exact, a few dollars more, but substantially less than $1 million.
But the thing that's interesting, and I think it's important that people know that budget, when they see the movie, it does not look like a low-budget movie. And I wanted to ask you, how do you make a small-budget film about a billion-dollar subject still look like $1 million?
Well, thank you. Hopefully it looks like $5 million, but $1 million is a good way of saying it. Thank you.
It was a general.
I thought you were using the expression when $1 million seemed like a lot of money, which of course it is, but it isn't. You beg, you borrow, you get actors who usually make a large amount of money to be so interested to work together and to make this movie that they defray all of their cost. You follow the John Sloss. He's the wonderful lawyer producer who has a company called Indigent, which makes a lot of very, very super low-budget movies, and he came up with a formula. He said, here's what you do. Just pay everybody $100 a day, have very low budgets for production design and art design in terms of things to make or build or acquire, and give everybody who works on the movie, for the most part, a gross participation in the back end. So the art department, head of the art department, got 1 point of the movie. It's just simple. There's no adjusted gross, as they say in Speed the Plow. There is no net. And it's a way of dealing with people fairly. If you make no money from the movie, then nobody makes any money. But if you have a windfall, then everybody participates in a fairly accurately scaled version of how much they should participate. Now, having said that, we had Frankie Diago, a brilliant production designer who was a friend of Susan's and of mine, do the production design. So I knew that she could call in some favors. She's worked a lot. She's very successful. And I also knew that I could be helpful. So anybody that we knew who had things that we could use in the movie, I called them and I begged them. Joe Alisi, the costume designer, did the same thing. He's done Susan's wardrobe design for many Hollywood big-budget features. So when he called the costume house and said, we need to construct a pad for Ralph Fiennes' stomach so he doesn't appear quite so thin in this movie, he's playing a character who should look a little chubby, and he drinks a lot. He probably has, a beer belly. That alone, that item probably would have cost the entire budget of the costume department if we'd had to pay the correct amount of money for it. So down the line, Christoph gave us silver, Fendi gave us furs, Vuitton gave us vintage luggage so that when you go into Doris Duke's closet, if we didn't have Vuitton, we would have had Sport Sack by Bob Balaban's closet would have been up in Doris Duke's closet. Bulgari was fantastic with the jewelry. They called and said, we love it when Susan wears our stuff. She's so loyal to us. Let us send you Bulgari jewels for her to wear during the movie. And we said, thank you, but we can't afford the guard to hold on to the jewelry, basically. And they said, we'll send the guard. So anytime Susan Sarandon wears anything by Bulgari in the movie, which is fairly frequently, there was a guard standing by who then took the jewels, put them in a vault, and went back to Italy or wherever he came from when it was over. We had to do a retake. We added a close-up of Susan on the staircase wearing a fabulous necklace. They had to fly back the necklace from Italy because it was, 6 months later, and we did the additional shot. That's what happens sometimes when you work with established movie stars that are also beloved by a lot of the people that they've come into contact with. I ran into a young man in the subway, Eric Gaskins, came up to me. I like your work, Bob. Thank you so much. What's your name? Eric. Eric, what do you do? I'm a dress designer. Hey, how'd you like to make a free dress for a movie star in a movie we're making? And literally 10 days later, he was there with Joe Alisi sketching something. And a week after that, Susan Sarandon was tripping down the stairs in a fabulous-looking, vintage-looking 1989 ball gown that Eric had whipped us up for us and given to us. There's a full page in Vanity Fair of this dress in this month's Vanity Fair where they give us our very lovely review. So that's what we did down the line. We worked with the mansion, Woodbury, old Westbury Gardens in Old Westbury, Long Island, which gave us the house to shoot in. We did have to pay them. It was our entire production design budget, but we deferred some of their cost, and they eventually made a reasonable amount of money considering how we did the entire movie in their house, could never have done it. That was one of the reasons the movie looks rather nicely, is because we're shooting in a place where the Phipps family used to live. They moved out in 1955, established their house as a trust for a museum, and that is how those particular rich people lived, and that's where Doris got to live in the movie. So it's a beautiful estate. I recommend visiting it at any time. You can picnic in the garden when the weather's nice.
Well, and I'm thinking now, thinking back to the film, that there's a lot of reference in the film to Doris's global travels,
yes.
But we never actually see her anywhere.
Yes, you figured it out.
Yeah.
They write letters, and you hear about the fabulous places they're going and buying and doing, and a couple of years pass during the movie, as the servants basically take on and off the furniture guards from the furniture so it won't get faded by the sun, and various other conventions. I'm glad when I look back on it that we didn't have the $20 million that you might have made the movie for. I probably would have been tempted to take the two of them traveling in India and Afghanistan or wherever it is they might have gone. Of course, even then you couldn't go to Afghanistan too easily. Right. But I'm kind of glad we didn't have that money, looking back on it, because it forced us, again, to concentrate on these two characters, which that's what we have in the movie. We have great actors playing interesting parts, and there's very little to get in the way, you could say.
I want to take 1 second and give out our number. We've got a couple minutes left, and I've been enjoying the conversation so much I forgot to let other people in on it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know if at this hour of the day we'll get much, but folks, if you're listening, you'd love to call in and ask Bob Balaban a question. The number is 646-595-3135. So let me ask you this. In directing Susan and Ray, how much do you actually direct people like this, and how much do you just kind of get out of their way?
A lot of it is getting out of their way. A lot of it is spending some very quiet time before the movie begins, quote, rehearsing. But rehearsing isn't how will I say this line and where do I stand and what's my motivation. I mean, there is some of that. But rehearsing is really making two people feel comfortable knowing that there's a short amount of time and they're going to live another person's life. We talk about their relationship. We answer questions, the simplest things. Oh, am I really going to be doing needlepoint? Let's have a needlepoint person teach me how to do needlepoint today. In Susan's case, a lot of it was, what's the inside of this woman like? She wanted to be very careful that she didn't simply present herself as the idea of a fabulously wealthy and eccentric person. That's the thing I love about both of their performances. You could say in 3 sentences you could describe both of these characters, but it wouldn't tell you anything about the complex way that both of them figured out to show you these people on screen. I mean, Susan could have done Joan Crawford, no more wire coat hangers, and there is an element of that to her character. But there's so much else that I like that what you pointed out in the beginning. You think these two people are the stereotypes that you imagine them to be, and after 5 or 10 minutes of looking at them, you go, "Wait a minute, there's something else going on here," because the two of them spent some time in rehearsal investigating the more complex nature of these people and not putting them into a stereotypical box in any way. Directing them is getting them to do the movie, making sure they're comfortable, answering questions, and as you're shooting, being a little bit more flexible than you might be for a big-budget Hollywood movie. Hey, I'd like to stand over there. Why doesn't this thing happen? Could we perhaps approach this? I'd call London, and 5 minutes later, we'd have, from our wonderful author, Hugh Costello, a new opening monologue for a scene. And it was a little more flexible, and I think that was helpful, too.
Well, speaking of acting, I want to use a couple minutes here before we have to go. Talk a little bit about the wide variety to your career. So my wife was leaving for work today. I said, I'm going to talk to Bob, and in my mind, you are forever etched in my mind as Russell Dalrymple from Seinfeld. But she said Close Encounters, and I mean you've acted in these landmark films.
Well, the first movie I was in was actually The Midnight Cowboy, which happened to be the only X-rated movie ever to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. And that was when I was about 20 years old and I was going to New York University. So I've been around a long time, and I've been fortunate, not always, of course, but to be in a number of things that ended up being really interesting movies directed by wonderful, world-class, great directors like Steven Spielberg or John Schlesinger or Sidney Pollack or Sidney Lumet, some wonderful people.
And where are you going to go from here? I mean, you've directed a movie. It's a wonderful movie to watch. You produced on Gosford Park. You've done all this acting. as you look ahead and you think, here's my plan, what do you want to be doing?
I'd like to be directing more movies. I probably will write some more children's books. I wrote a best-selling series of books for Scholastic called McGraw. We sold 2 million copies. Really, I feel like I'm basically just beginning, and the door is just beginning to open. So there's a lot of things I'm planning on doing. I have a movie that I'm hoping to direct this year called The Eustace Diamonds, based on an Anthony Trollope novel. Julian Fellows did a wonderful version of the screenplay. I then hired him to write Gosford Park, and he won an Academy Award for Best Screenwriter. So we have that large mountain to hopefully climb this year. Like Doris, like Bernard and Doris, it's the story of mostly extremely wealthy and exotic people living in London, in this case in 1875. But unlike Bernard and Doris, we will actually have a few dollars with which to make some costumes and to have some beautiful scenery. And it's a great story, so I do hope to make that this year. I've just finished a movie acting in called Recount for HBO that will be on, I believe, in May, about the Gore Bush election in Florida and the hanging Chad issues and everything else that went with that impossible and very unnerving situation. I think it's really like a thriller when you see it.
Was there drama? Was there drama in that situation? I don't recall it being all that serious.
Well, I think you're kidding.
I am kidding. Yeah.
It's really a nail biter, even though you know exactly how it's going to turn out. It's quite exciting, and Kevin Spacey is brilliant, as is Laura Dern and Dennis Leary and Tom Wilkinson and John Hurt and Ed Begley Jr. I mean, it's got a wonderful cast, and it's very exciting. And I'm in it also.
That was my other question. Are you going to be acting more in the or
Well, you will see me in Recount next year, or this year. And I will, as it fits in and as it arises. I'm very happy to have an ongoing acting career. I love sitting on somebody else's set and not worrying when the scenery falls down, so to speak, and saying, well, I know it's the end of the day, and I know there's no overtime, and I know it's starting to rain, and I'm not even anxious because I'm just an actor here, and I'll just sit around and have a great time. I love acting in other people's movies. It's you learn so much by watching everybody direct other people, and you also get to meet a number of people. Part of my being a producer and a director is I have a good Rolodex, and I've really had some lovely times with a massive amount of actors. So if I'm casting a 2-line part in a movie that's sometimes the hardest thing you can do, I can kind of roll back in my mind, well, who did I love last year who came in and said hello? And we can have that person. And also occasionally I am fortunate enough to work with some people who were famous enough to get movies made, and, well, we got to know each other because we spent 9 months together, on the Isle of Wight last year.
Last question.
If that's an isle, I'm not sure if it's really.
I'm sure it is. Last question. I know you need to get going.
Did nobody want to talk to us?
I'm watching the switchboard. I'm afraid they were probably more interested in hearing than asking at this point. But I've got one more question.
I think they were transfixed and their fingers were unable to dial at that moment.
Well, it's hard too because you've been in so much. It's like, where do you start? That was my issue in thinking about this. I mean, I'd love to talk to you about Seinfeld, but we've only got so much time, and I want to get one more question in with you before we have to go. And that is this: in Bernard and Doris, it's a very small cast. I didn't see you that I noticed. I didn't see you walk through any scenes or in the background. Are you in there anywhere?
I'm sorry?
Are you in any scenes? Are you in the background?
You might catch me in a reflection in a window somewhere, but it wasn't on purpose.
Oh, okay. And where I was leading with that is there anything that ties together the movies that you work on behind the scenes? Is there any common thread? Anything, any mark of Bob Balaban?
I'd like to think that we all had a pretty good time working together. From the actors to the crew to the craft service people. I'd like to think that it was a harmonious experience, and it's not always, but we do our best.
Very good. Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
on
you.
Media today.
Is your name really Mr. Media?
It is. It's on the birth certificate. I don't know why my mom thought it'd be okay to call me Mr. and then Media, but that's what I got.
Well, it was prescient. It was really nice talking to you, and I hope we do it again sometime, Mister.
That would be great. Thank you, Bob.
Bye-bye.
And bye-bye.
Thanks.